Hi, and welcome back to Reddit Confessions. The first sound I heard was the click of the lock. Not the normal, casual twist of a key, but slow, deliberate, like she wanted me to hear it. I was in the living room, halfway through folding laundry, when Jenna stepped inside. She didn't even look at the piles of clothes scattered across the couch. She walked in with her heels still wet from the rain, dripping little circles onto the hardwood, her coat buttoned up all the way despite the warm air. She stopped 3 feet from me, her hand still clutching the strap of her purse, and said it like she'd been practicing in front of a mirror. "I'm going to see another man. If you try to stop me, I'll call the police and say you hurt me." It wasn't a shout. It wasn't even angry. It was cold, surgical. She dropped the words into the room and let them sit there like poison. My mouth went dry instantly. The hum of the dryer in the next room was suddenly deafening, and I could hear my own heartbeat in my ears. I didn't speak. I couldn't. She tilted her head, almost daring me to challenge her, her eyes locked on mine like she was waiting for me to make one wrong move. And maybe I would have begged or argued or said something pathetic, if her phone hadn't started ringing right then. The name flashing on her screen made her hand twitch. I don't know who it was, but it was enough to drain the color from her face. She turned away from me so fast her coat flared, stepping onto the porch with the phone pressed tight to her ear. I followed, keeping quiet, hearing only fragments through the rain. "Not now. I told you I'd handle it." "No, he's here." This wasn't the plan. She kept pacing, glancing at the door like she was checking if I was still watching. And I was. Every second. Because in that moment, I realized something, whatever she thought she had complete control over, was slipping away from her. And I had no idea yet just how far karma was about to go. She came back inside like nothing had happened, but her eyes wouldn't stay still. They kept darting between me, the window, and the phone in her hand. I didn't say a word, I just kept folding laundry, deliberately slow, like I hadn't heard a thing. That silence seemed to bother her more than if I'd yelled. She tossed her purse on the armchair, shrugged out of her coat, and headed for the kitchen. I could hear the sharp clink of glass as she poured herself water, then the sound of her pacing. Finally, she spoke without looking at me. "I'm going out. Don't wait up." Her tone was clipped, but there was an edge of something else, urgency, maybe even desperation. She was trying to maintain that calm, untouchable control, but the phone call had rattled her, and I could tell she was doing her best to keep me from noticing. The problem was, I had noticed, and I wasn't about to let that go. I asked where she was going, my voice flat, almost bored, like I didn't care about the answer. She froze for a second before tossing out, "You don't need to know," and grabbing her bag again. But as she reached for the door, her phone lit up once more, buzzing so violently on the table that it nearly slid off the edge. I caught a glimpse of the name this time. It wasn't a name at all. Just 3 letters, D-A-S. She snatched it up instantly and stepped outside again, her voice low but tense. I moved closer to the window, keeping myself hidden behind the curtain. Her words were clipped and urgent. "I told you not to call me like this." "No, he doesn't suspect anything. I said I'd meet you later, but this changes things." She glanced over her shoulder toward the house, her jaw tightening, before turning away and walking down the porch steps. I didn't follow her. Instead, I watched from the window as she crossed the street and climbed into a black SUV that had been idling there the whole time. The driver didn't get out, didn't wave, just pulled away slowly, disappearing into the gray drizzle. My stomach twisted, but not from jealousy. This wasn't the usual, cheating spouse, scenario I'd feared. It was something different, something that made her nervous enough to lose her composure. And as pathetic as it sounds, that gave me a strange, guilty thrill. Because for once, the power wasn't all in her hands. Something, or someone, was making her dance to their tune. That night, she didn't come home. I didn't call her. I didn't even text. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the rain against the windows, wondering if I had just witnessed the first crack in whatever game she'd been playing. And deep down, I started hoping that whoever was on the other end of those phone calls wasn't just a man she was meeting, but the beginning of the end for her plans. And I had no idea how close I was to being right. The next morning, I woke to the sound of the garage door. It was 6:12 a.m., earlier than Jenna ever left for work, and when I glanced out the bedroom window, I saw her slipping into her car in jeans and a hoodie, clothes she hadn't worn in years unless she was trying not to be noticed. She didn't see me watching, and I didn't bother to hide. I wanted her to know I was paying attention now, even if I didn't confront her. That SUV from the night before wasn't outside, but my gut told me she wasn't heading anywhere innocent. For the first time in years, I decided to follow her. My old sedan coughed and groaned when I started it, but I kept a few cars back, praying she wouldn't notice me in the rearview mirror. She drove with purpose, no music, no hesitation at lights. Eventually, she pulled into a narrow side street behind a row of worn brick buildings. I parked half a block away and watched as she stepped out, glanced over both shoulders, and entered a side door with peeling green paint. I waited, my hands sweating against the steering wheel, heart thumping in my ears. After 10 minutes, a man came out, a tall, broad-shouldered guy with a trimmed beard and a phone pressed to his ear. He wasn't dressed for a casual meeting, he looked like someone who could break a man's jaw without breaking stride. I recognized him. Not personally, but enough to know I'd seen him before. His face had been in a local news story months ago about a fraud investigation involving some shady real estate scheme. That's when it clicked. Jenna wasn't just cheating. She was tangled in something dangerous, the kind of thing you don't talk your way out of if it goes bad. And suddenly, her threat to call the police on me didn't seem like a bluff, it felt like part of a bigger script she was ready to play if things started closing in. I stayed until she finally emerged an hour later, carrying a small black folder pressed tightly under her arm. She got into her car, didn't even check her phone before pulling away, and headed in the opposite direction from home. I let her go. There was no point in chasing her now. Back in my kitchen, staring at the cold coffee I'd poured hours earlier, I realized something unsettling. If I confronted her about this, she could spin it to make me the villain. But if I stayed quiet, I might actually get to see what would happen when her perfect little empire started collapsing around her. And I swear, part of me, pathetic, worn down, soft-spoken me, wanted to see her finally lose. By the time Jenna returned that evening, I'd already rehearsed a dozen different ways to act normal. I didn't want her to know I'd followed her, not yet. She came through the door looking flushed, not in the way someone does after a workout or a long day at work, but like she'd just been arguing with someone and barely won the last word. She dumped her keys onto the counter and went straight to the fridge, grabbing a bottle of water without saying a single word to me. Normally, I'd ask about her day, trying to bridge the gap between us like the pathetic peacekeeper I've always been, but this time I stayed silent. My silence made her uneasy, I could see it in the way she avoided my eyes, the way her hand lingered too long twisting the bottle cap. While she drank, her phone lit up on the counter, and for a brief second, I thought she'd ignore it. But then she lunged for it with almost panicked urgency. She didn't answer. Instead, she read the message, locked the screen, and stuffed the phone deep into her bag. She muttered something about needing a shower and disappeared down the hall. The sound of running water filled the house, and that's when curiosity overpowered fear. I crossed the kitchen, pulled her phone from her bag, and saw one unread notification on the lock screen. It wasn't a name this time, it was that same set of 3 letters, D.S. The preview of the message was cut off, but the words I could see made my stomach tighten. They know. Meet tonight. Bring everything. I set the phone back exactly where I found it, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure she'd hear it over the shower. My mind was racing. Who was they? What did everything mean? And why did it feel like I was standing on the edge of something far more dangerous than an affair? When she came back into the kitchen, hair damp and wearing that same "don't ask me anything" expression, I just nodded when she said she was meeting friends for dinner. No questions, no pushback, just quiet compliance. She seemed relieved by that. But I didn't stay home. 10 minutes after she left, I grabbed my jacket, slipped into my car, and kept far enough behind to avoid suspicion. She drove across town, this time to a rundown motel with flickering neon lights. She parked around the side, out of view from the main road, and went into one of the rooms without knocking. The curtains were already drawn. I waited, watching shadows move behind the fabric, until a black SUV, the same one from before, pulled into the lot. The bearded man got out, holding a heavy-looking duffel bag, and disappeared into the same room. I sat there gripping the steering wheel, every instinct telling me to leave before anyone noticed me. But I couldn't. Not when I felt so close to uncovering the truth. I stayed there for nearly an hour, the rain tapping steadily against my windshield, until the motel door finally opened. Jenna stepped out first, clutching that black folder again. The man followed, scanning the parking lot like he expected trouble. He held the duffel bag tighter now, and when Jenna got into her car, he leaned in her window and said something that made her stiffen instantly. She didn't respond, just nodded once and pulled away. I waited until her taillights were gone before starting my engine, my pulse still thudding in my ears. I didn't follow her this time. Instead, I kept my eyes on the SUV. The man lingered for a moment, looking around like he was making sure no one had seen what just happened. Then he tossed the duffel into the back seat and drove off in the opposite direction. That was the moment I realized I wasn't just dealing with betrayal. This wasn't about late-night texts or someone at the office. Jenna was in deep with people who didn't operate within the safety of polite arguments and divorce lawyers. The thought made my skin crawl, and yet, there was a grim part of me that wanted to see how far she would fall before the ground gave out beneath her. I drove home in silence, parking a few houses down so she wouldn't notice I'd been out. When she came in later, she was unusually soft-spoken, almost cautious. She didn't ask me anything about my evening, didn't volunteer details about hers. She just poured herself a glass of wine, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at her phone without touching it for nearly 15 minutes. It was like watching someone waiting for a verdict they knew wasn't going to go in their favor. And I couldn't shake the feeling that, sooner rather than later, karma was going to deliver it for her, right in front of me. The next day felt like living in a house where the walls were quietly shifting inward. Jenna moved through the morning like a shadow, barely making eye contact, speaking in clipped sentences, her phone never more than a foot from her hand. She kept checking the window as if she expected someone to show up unannounced. I could tell she was on edge, and the strange part was, it wasn't because of me. I'd been invisible for years in my own marriage, but now my silence had a weight to it, a presence she couldn't ignore. By mid-afternoon, I heard her in the bedroom, talking low on the phone. I stood just outside the door, heart pounding, catching pieces of her side of the conversation. I have it all, yes, I said all of it, no, I wasn't followed. Her voice wavered on that last part, and I knew instantly she wasn't certain. She ended the call abruptly and walked out, nearly bumping into me in the hallway. She froze, searching my face for any sign I'd heard too much. I gave her nothing, just a weak smile and a mumbled, "Sorry, didn't mean to get in your way." That evening, she said she had to run a quick errand, and wouldn't be gone long. I waited 5 minutes after she left before grabbing my keys. This time, I didn't follow closely. I kept far enough back that I could disappear if she looked in her mirror. She drove to the industrial side of town, the place where warehouses sat empty except for the occasional flicker of light behind cracked windows. She parked next to a loading dock, got out, and walked toward a side door where a single bulb buzzed weakly above her head. As I watched from the shadows, another car pulled up, an older sedan with tinted windows. A man got out carrying a small case, glancing around before approaching her. They didn't hug, didn't shake hands, just exchanged the case for the black folder she always carried. Their conversation was brief, and from the tense way they moved, it was clear they didn't want to linger. The man returned to his car, but before leaving, he passed something small to her, something she pocketed quickly. When she turned back toward her own car, her face was pale. She got in, sat for a moment with her hands gripping the wheel, and then drove off without noticing me parked half a block away. I stayed behind, staring at the now empty spot where the exchange had happened. There was a part of me that wanted to walk up to that loading dock, to see if anything had been left behind, some clue, some scrap of paper, but another part of me knew this wasn't a game I could just stroll into without risk. Whatever Jenna had entangled herself in was starting to look like it had layers far beyond what I'd imagined. And for the first time, I began to wonder if I was safer not stopping her at all, because whoever was pulling her strings might not care about collateral damage. And I was still living under the same roof as their primary player. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the house made me tense, every set of headlights passing outside made me glance at the window. Around 2 a.m., I heard the faint sound of the front door easing open. I got up quietly and moved to the hallway, keeping to the shadows. Jenna was in the living room, crouched over her purse with her back to me, stuffing something inside. It wasn't the usual clumsy shuffling of makeup or receipts, these movements were careful, precise. She zipped the bag slowly, slung it over her shoulder, and headed for the garage. I stayed far enough back to see without being seen. The garage door opened just enough for her to slip out, then closed again with a dull thud. Moments later, I heard her car start. I threw on a hoodie, grabbed my keys, and waited a full minute before backing out of the driveway with my lights off until I was a safe distance away. She drove toward the outskirts of town, past the last clusters of streetlights, until the road narrowed into a two-lane stretch surrounded by trees. Eventually, she turned down a gravel drive that led to a dimly lit cabin. From where I parked, I could see only glimpses through the pines, faint yellow light seeping through drawn curtains. I sat there in the dark, gripping the steering wheel, my breath fogging up the inside of the windshield. Then I saw movement. Two men stepped out onto the porch. One was the bearded man from the motel, the other was taller, dressed in a black jacket with his hood pulled up. They were speaking in low, fast bursts, but I couldn't hear from this distance. Jenna appeared in the doorway holding that same black folder. She handed it to the hooded man, who flipped through the contents, then glanced at her with an expression I couldn't read. The bearded man leaned in close to her, his voice just loud enough for me to catch two words that sent a chill up my spine: "They're watching." Whatever conversation followed was too quiet for me to hear, but when Jenna stepped back inside, the two men stayed on the porch a moment longer, scanning the darkness like they were expecting someone to be out there. I sank lower in my seat, heart racing, as the bearded man's gaze lingered in my direction. After what felt like forever, they both went back inside. I didn't move. I just sat there, frozen, trying to process what I'd seen. This wasn't an affair. It wasn't just some reckless fling or midlife rebellion. It was something else, bigger, more dangerous, and tightly wound around people I had no business being anywhere near. And yet, I couldn't stop. I had to know what she was mixed up in, even if it meant driving myself straight into whatever storm was coming. When Jenna finally left an hour later, she didn't look shaken. If anything, she looked determined, almost like she'd just made a choice she couldn't take back. I followed her home, careful not to get too close, my mind running through 100 versions of what "they're watching" could mean, and wondering if maybe, without realizing it, I was already one of the she'd been warned about. The following day was one of those strange, heavy days where every small sound seemed louder than it should be. Jenna moved through the house with the kind of calm that felt staged, like she was performing a role she hoped I'd buy into. She made coffee, hummed softly to herself in the kitchen, even asked if I needed anything from the store, a gesture so out of character lately that it made me more suspicious than reassured. I played along, nodding absently, all while keeping my eyes on her every move. She might have thought she'd regained control of the situation, but I'd seen too much to believe the mask she was wearing. By late afternoon, she announced she'd be working late and left dressed in a way that was neither office appropriate nor casual. Dark jeans, fitted jacket, hair pulled back tight, an outfit meant for moving quickly, not sitting in a meeting. This time I didn't wait 5 minutes before leaving. I was on her trail within 60 seconds of her pulling out of the driveway. She drove toward the edge of town again, but instead of the cabin road, she took a turn toward the old rail yard. The place had been abandoned for years except for a few rusting freight cars and a warehouse that looked like it should have collapsed a decade ago. I parked behind a derelict box truck, far enough away to see without being obvious. Jenna's car pulled up beside the warehouse, and almost immediately the black SUV from before appeared, parking nose to nose with her. The bearded man got out, carrying a small metallic case this time. From the shadows, I watched as they spoke, his posture rigid, hers tense but not afraid. She glanced over her shoulder more than once, which told me she was expecting someone else. Then, as if on cue, another vehicle rolled in, an unmarked white van. 2 men stepped out, both in plain clothes but with an unmistakable air of authority. They didn't approach slowly, they walked directly toward Jenna and the bearded man, their pace steady but deliberate. Something in the air shifted. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the argument unfolding, gestures, raised voices, the bearded man pointing toward the van like he was demanding something. Jenna's head was moving back and forth, shaking quickly, her hands up as if trying to calm both sides at once. And then it happened. One of the men from the van reached into his jacket and flashed something small and metallic, maybe a badge, maybe something else, and whatever it was, it froze Jenna in place. She didn't move, didn't speak, just stood there like she'd been rooted to the cracked pavement. The bearded man took a step back, clearly not happy, but he didn't run. Instead, the 2 men motioned for both of them to follow, opening the van's side door. At that moment, I had to make a choice, drive away before I was noticed, or stay and risk being pulled into whatever this was. My better judgment screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't. I stayed just long enough to see Jenna climb into that van without so much as a glance in my direction. And as the door slid shut, one thought took hold in my mind: this wasn't karma arriving slowly, it was kicking the door in. What I didn't know yet was that the next 24 hours would change the game entirely, not just for her, but for me. The next day, Jenna didn't come home. I didn't call, didn't text, didn't even check to see if she'd posted anything online. The truth was, I didn't need to. I already knew whatever had happened at that rail yard had locked her into a situation she couldn't talk her way out of. Late that afternoon, my curiosity finally got the better of me, and I drove past the same area. The warehouse was quiet, the van gone, and there was no trace of the SUV. When I pulled back into our driveway, something caught my eye on the porch. A single envelope, my name written on the front in her handwriting. Inside was her house key and a short note: "Don't look for me. It's better this way." No apology, no explanation, just those 8 words. I stood there for a long moment, holding the key in my hand, feeling a strange mix of relief and closure. Over the following weeks, life began to feel lighter. I no longer walked on eggshells in my own home, no longer feared what mood she'd bring through the door. I slept better. I cooked meals for myself without wondering if she'd pick them apart. And in a way, karma had done the work I never had the courage to do. It removed the person who had been draining me for years, and it happened without me ever having to raise my voice. Eventually, I learned through a mutual acquaintance that Jenna had left town completely. Rumor was she'd been asked to cooperate with some kind of investigation. I didn't ask for details, I didn't need to. Whatever world she'd been living in was no longer mine to worry about. For the first time in a long time, I could just breathe. My home was quiet, my mind was my own, and the constant tension that had been my normal for years had evaporated. It wasn't the ending I'd ever imagined, but it turned out to be the one I needed. So, if you've stuck with me through this whole story, thank you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Was there a moment in all of this that stood out to you the most? Drop a comment below and share your take on it. And remember, you're watching Reddit Confessions, where sometimes the truth isn't just stranger than fiction, it's better.